Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Marie. I would like to extend a warm welcome to you all to Survive and Thrive with Business Automation. And now it's my pleasure to introduce you to our speaker. Today, we have Rob Shildrick, Head of Mid-Market Enterprise Endeavor Proprietary Limited. Rob is actually a veteran of wholesale distribution and supply chain industry and have started his career with Australia's largest producing company. So over the course of 20 years, he became an internal business transformation, a modernization specialist, eventually moving on to delivery of modernization and transformation for companies in Australia. And he's really passionate about working with businesses to ensure they are future fit and ready to exploit leading edge business practices and technology that is yet to come. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Rob.
Thank you, Marie. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Rob. So, Rob, I guess when people think about automation, they really start thinking about robots in factory and workers being really replaced by big clunky machines. So, could you start at the beginning? And can you please help us break down how you see automation?
Okay, thanks. So firstly, let me just start by saying, from my perspective, today is an opportunity to start a discussion. So I'm not expecting that everybody that attends today's session, and thank you for attending, by the way, is going to have every question answered necessarily, although we do have a Q&A section at the end. So let's start with a bit of platform first. So what is automation? So put simply, it's about replacing humans in a process as such. So typically this is with a machine or a computer. So an example of that in today's world would be an electric bike, which is actually a pretty good example because a lot of people are doing courier deliveries now have moved to electric bikes because they're cost effective. They're able to actually maintain a good speed and get around and do their job with efficiency. So that talks to the basic concept of what is, for me or for us, what is automation. Let's talk about business automation and what that actually means. So from here, automation is really about using or leveraging software technology to do certain things. So whether that be a robotic arm inside a manufacturing plant, like say Holden's, or Holden's aren't around anymore, but organisations like that, or generally just software that adds speed and efficiency and outcome to a process. So you generally do this automation concept to gain some efficiencies itself, or to reduce the human errors that might actually come through. So in some cases, it can actually take a little longer, but you actually get a better quality outcome. So again, a good example for me of this would be in the old days when we used to have cards for our inventory, and some of us are old enough to remember that. And people would sort of tick off a unit going out on a card, put it back in the shelf like you did with the timesheet cards and so on. We've moved more to a world where systems manage this. So we need just people to actually do tasks as the system directs, or where there's an RF gun recording a unit coming out of stock into stock and so on. And that's delivered significant improvements to companies, that sort of concept. So that level of automation we've seen over the time. Now, it's possible some of you on this session today are still dealing with semi-manual processes and so on, and I'll come through the journey conversation around that a little bit better.
So yes, Rob, business automation really has become a very popular topic with the businesses we're speaking to. Perhaps could you help us understand the range of reason why folks are getting buzzed up about it?
Buzzed up, yeah, no problems at all. I think, first of all, there's a number of benefits that are delivered by automation. So I'll go through later on the reality that you have to invest and take some steps to put automation in place, but people see significant benefits there. So I'll talk about this a few times, but personally, I'm quite passionate about the concept of future fit organisations or businesses. And what that means is businesses that are setting themselves up to be able to adapt to things that happen. We saw that during the COVID years as a pretty easy example. But in general, business has influences outside of their control that they want to be better sorted from. So automation is one of those processes or one of those set of steps you can actually take to do a number of things. So if I start with benefits, there's, for me, I won't read every one of the 10 that I'm going to go through, but efficiency is one of the major ones, that you do this to actually make the processes more efficient. So in turn, that it actually speeds up the outcome that you're trying to achieve, or it generally takes cost out of the concept and provides greater accuracy. So an example of this for me in my life is I dealt with a civil engineering organisation a little while ago. There was the owner of the business who had actually started the business 60 odd years earlier, and he loved nothing more than sitting down on a Friday afternoon into his night, sitting with the 400 plus supplier invoices on his desk, a wine, and just folding through each one, checking it off, because that's how he had his hands on the business as such. He would then actually make the odd phone call, so maybe 6 or 7 people were contacted. What's this about? How did this happen? And a few hours later on, he got through his 400, and he decided that maybe 100 weren't going to be paid or 50 weren't going to be paid some way. His son took over the business, and overnight we put in a proper automated system. So they had a purchase order concept in place. Things were approved before they went out to a supplier for goods to come into the organisation. So we sat down and said, do you know what? If it's approved going out, why do we have to have all this process in place if it comes back and is receipted, that you've got the right level of, you've got the right line spent on the purchase order, you've got the right quantity being delivered, why would you actually need to do that? So we actually automated that whole process. So basically, if a purchase order went out and came back in as receipted in exactly the fashion you requested it at exactly the same price, it was ready and approved for payment. Now, civil engineering company, so yes, they still seem to take time to actually pay people themselves, but the process was sped up there. Scalability is another big part of this for me. So we use the term quite often when we talk to organisations about growing your business but not growing your back office. So there's no doubt there's some economies of scale naturally. When your business grows, you'll have certain roles, say managers, that you don't have to employ another one of. You might have a couple more people in the warehouse, etc. So there's some natural economies of scale where you'll achieve better margins or whatever it is, but that only lasts to a point. So what automation actually allows you to do is find the things that can be automated that make sense, that achieve growth for you. And then when you do grow twice, 3, maybe 100 times, those things don't largely have to be added to. They can sustain that growth. So an example of that for me is dealing with, e-commerce maybe, and you've started that business out and it's been successful. It's a bit of a side business. Maybe it represented 15% of your revenue, and it just takes off overnight. Those organisations that haven't automated that properly and are doing manual updates to the e-commerce platform, or having issues with stock that hasn't been sorted out, they then have problems. And those problems turn out in customer results, where the customers don't get the goods they've ordered for, or worse, they get the wrong goods. They turn out in different ways. So what organisations, for me, that are future fit are doing is they've got that stuff sorted out straight away. So whether they're doing $100 worth of sales a day or $5 million, the processes exist. Now, yes, you still have to ratchet up some things at different times, but we want to actually build in a concept that is scalable. So for me, we're going to talk about ERPs at some point. That's one of the big value propositions from an ERP. They're built to sort of be with you at a certain size and allow you to grow as you go forward. So just to the next one, if I can get my slides working properly. Improved customer experience is a big one for me. I think it's quite funny when I go out and talk to organisations over the years, and they've quite rightly picked up the customer satisfaction is important, and they've put on a role to actually support handling that. So it might be a customer service manager or customer experience manager, whatever you call those nowadays. But they actually haven't fixed any underlying problems. So what you end up is a role where somebody's got to field phone calls, come back to the business and talk about different things. They haven't actually changed the service arrangement, which is delivered by doing the automation part of it. So that's important to me. So if I take another example of this for me, I've got a manufacturing company that I've dealt with now for a while. When I first met them, they were running an older ERP solution. They had invested heavily on customer growth and actually done some really great things in lead generation and building up an approach to bring on people, provide them quotes, and I think really fantastic outcome for them. But what they didn't do was actually fix their underlying processes. So what happened was whenever they would have a sales order come in the system, they actually didn't have a clarity around what the inventory items were, to the point they didn't trust it, and they actually would walk downstairs after an order was placed, physically cite the goods that were there or not there, and then go back and complete the order or ring the customer back and say, we can't do that or we can do that or whatever it was. And to me, it was just crazy. Here you are in a situation where your whole business is focused about looking after your customer and doing the right things, as it should be, and yet your underlying foundation solution was not actually giving you the confidence to know where you had stock. So you were setting yourself up for failure. Hope that makes sense.
All right, sorry about that. So, yeah, thank you so much, Rob. So, automation clearly has a wide range of benefits that businesses could harness, help them really grow and improve profitability. But clearly, this isn't the case. So, just flicking a button and a stuff will start magically being automated. So, what else do we need to keep in mind when we're looking at areas of businesses that could be automated?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So first of all, let's talk about the types of automation, because I think the term automation, everybody goes to the sexy AI conversation as an example. And just for a bit of fun, let me share with you. I come from a poultry organisation in my early days back in the 90s. And in that world, we had chickens coming down the line to be produced or dissected in that case. And we replaced people who used to look at the chickens and say, is this a good quality, this is a bad quality, etc., with photography or an AI concept where there would be photos taken against the database. It would work out what was an A grade product and a B grade product and a C grade product. So the value proposition then was very much about quality and having the right products. But actually, it was more than that. What ended up happening was, once we put that in place, the actual line could move faster. So we didn't just get an advantage at that point where the people were being replaced, and yes, there was some reduction in costs and so on. Actually, what we got to do was turn the whole line up by about 300%. And that flew all the way through all the manufacturing steps to turn that up. Now, I'm pointing that out because that's a great example of AI in real world, but it's also an AI example from the 90s. So this is not a new concept, except it's a really interesting world with AI right now. There's a lot of great stuff. There's a lot more that you can do with the power of AI. And, I'm like everybody else. I'm watching what's happening in that space. So let's talk about the big winners for me around what's going on here with types of automation. So first I want to introduce the idea that companies and people are on the same journey, maybe at different pace. So what I mean by that is that there are people today that are doing some things with automation. They're actually ahead of other people because that's what's required. So e-commerce, they've already got information coming out of their enterprise solution or whatever it may be, the business solution in there. There are other people that have stepped back. So if I take an example, I met with an organisation again just recently, or maybe a year ago now, that was running Xero, running Sin 7 to look after their inventory systems, and the things talk to each other, but they actually had some problems around where that solution was running. And those problems were around roundings that, as an example, Sin 7 rounded a different way to what was happening in Xero. Is that an issue? Yeah, because your dollars start getting out of kilter and so on. That then would then pass over to other solutions as well. So for me, there's a big part of this conversation is actually having a true ERP solution underneath this. Now, we can have those conversations individually if you'd like about why I think that and so on. But one of the things is it offers a range of things. So looking through the list here, and again, I won't go through every one, but data automation in a true ERP solution just becomes inherent. So you're not looking for a CRM update. So sales guy out in the field takes a note from a meeting, puts it into the CRM. It just automatically goes across to wherever in the system that needs to be aware of. Equally, if we've got a sales order, it turns into an invoice, a sales result, that salesperson can see that information. It's totally connected within the one system. So data automation is flowing where it needs to. We can also do data automation between systems. So we have options around doing that. They might be whether we're using an API, whether we're using some sort of scheduled CSV file movement, or even down to an iPass conversation, which allows us to be a little bit more connected in various ways. But typically, for me, automation, if you can get it in the box for an enterprise solution, that's a good way to go. Another area that's probably worth touching on for me around using the solution is reporting automation. So what we see with organisations that, again, maybe running multiple systems, they talk to me about they're doing consolidations if they're a multi-entity organisation, and they're taking a period of time to do that. It might be, depending on where they are, in spreadsheets or a third-party solution, maybe a day, maybe a few hours, maybe many days, depending on what they're at to. So what we want to get to is automated reporting. So basically, all the data is continually in real time updating the reporting information. So consolidation shouldn't be an action. It should be a report that's available to tell you what's going on. So if you think about having 3 different entities, you push the button and the 3 entities are just aggregated together. Or if we're talking about true consolidations, eliminations and loans, etc., happen as they happen as well. And again, you can automate the processes there. So if we've got allocations that somebody is dealing with a phone bill comes into the head office, but you want to spread it across the 3 entities in that example, then we can automate that process that there's some rules that, we put 15, 15 and 70 against those entities for various reasons. So they can be totally automated. So the next thing I guess I also wanted to touch on was the robotic process automation. Just to give you an example, now I'm not suggesting everybody on this session today would need to do this, but Endeavour has worked with some of our larger customers around this space. So a good example is we have a transport organisation that has trains and train lines or infrastructure. They have signal boxes that help the trains move in an efficient way along the lines, and they have problems or had problems previously where the heat in those signal boxes would actually be so high or so strong it would actually outlast the air conditioning unit was in the box, etc. So when that happened, and anybody living in Victoria might have seen some of these occasions, the whole line would break down and stop because the signals were no longer working. They would send out somebody to fix those signals, and then once they're up and running, maybe an hour later, depending on how fast, the trains would start moving again. Our role was to look at a automation concept that actually had a logger inside the boxes that would regularly check on in real time the temperature, take data logs of the temperature, and then when certain conditions were met, it would go back and have a pre-active alert actually go out. So the service people, if the temperature started rising outside of the conditions, would actually be there before the trains would stop or before the signal box actually stopped itself, and be able to rectify that, whether that be fix the air conditioner that might have broken, or whether that be it's just a significant event and we needed to put some things there. Now, obviously, in that example, we couldn't handle every signal box going down, but what we could do is put in a process that automatically told them through systems and computers that you need to go and do something before this becomes a problem. So certainly some of that.
So you've clearly seen your fair share of common misunderstandings and fielded a few questions on this topic. So could you shed some more light on some of these other things that keep popping up in discussion on automation?
Yeah, so let's just pick on a couple of myths here for me. So I'll take the first one because it's an important one. Automation is costly. So look, the truth is that is somewhat truth. There's no doubt you need to invest in the right automation efforts in your organisation. It's not going to happen by just spending $1. It is something you need to invest in. But the payback or the benefits that are returned there are multiple. So if I think about using an example of Forbes, which I've got down the bottom there if you want to have a look at, and so on, their research or the research they're quoting talks about automation for companies that have actually engaged in it, committed to it, creating almost 6 times more likely to enjoy growth of 15%. So that's certainly true. From a Forrester research point of view, there's again research that says for future fit businesses that commit to automation and what that delivers, they're ready to go, and they also get about 3.2 times the growth that their peers are seeing in their own industry set. So I think there's a concept that, yep, there is some investment. So if we talk about an ERP solution, which I'm an advocate for and passionate about, replacing some of those traditional business systems, or even some of the older, not so great, haven't kept up with the world ERP solutions. In my mind, that effort is fairly substantial. There's some investment, there's some change management that goes on. But when you get to the other side, it's all about the actual payback and the benefits. And I just don't meet people that, unless you've had a really horrible experience for some reason with a bad partner, people don't tell me 3 months later on that they've made a mistake going to an ERP. What they tell me is, what do we do next? What's the next thing that we want to focus on? So I think it's not about doing everything in one go. By the way, I'm a ratchet believer, and you build a foundation, then you ratchet forward when that foundation is working, but it's important to get there. I think the other one that's interesting on there, and certainly with AI conversations top of mind, is automation going to take job roles away? I think this is interesting because from my experience over the last 25 plus years, I see people expect that they're going to do that, and they rarely do. And there's a couple of reasons for that in the business world. One, we're often talking to people that are struggling to find resources in their, say, warehouse or whatever it may be. So actually, by automating things, it's solving that problem of sparse resources available. The other side of it is we tend to find there's good people that we're maybe reducing the workload on. So if you think about the back office conversation, you've got a great debtors clerk who chases money, and as I call it, the brick wall that just, yep, that's great, but you need to pay us. Yep, that's great, you need to pay. You still need that person. What you don't want them doing is spending all their time doing the basic stuff and preparations for those calls. You need them to actually have the system spit out information and tell them that, hey, this is the thing you need to focus on in the call. Now, remember, from my point of view, I'm talking about an ERP solution that has largely all in one. What they should also have is a lot of interaction details. So, CRM is telling them, this is what the sales guy did last week. This is what such and such did yesterday. So when they're talking to somebody about chasing some bills or whatever, there's a bit of context to the conversation. So I think that's really important to me, that I understand people may have concerns about redundancies, but in reality, in the world I live in, I don't see that so much. I more see, resolving resource issues or deploying great people to focus on the value in the business rather than the mundane tasks that aren't important. And, for me, the best example there is supplier payments. How is that important to do that if you've got great people that can actually follow up other things in the business and such? So the last one I want to just touch on, I think can actually make me a little bit, not angry, but passionate, I guess, is myth 7 that says, I don't need to automate, everything is working well. I would suggest, myself included, if you're ever sitting there and saying, I'm done, I'm the perfect version of me, you're probably not right. And I don't think people necessarily lie to me. I think it's worse. I think they lie to themselves. So I meet organisations, by example, who are running around. I've got an organisation I met just recently. They're doing deboning of carcasses, so they're in the food industry. And when I have a conversation about how do you know how the business is going, what is it that's actually driving your actions down in the factory when you're producing your goods, etc. I get feedback like, I just know how it works. Or when you think about what I have to purchase, I'm used to sort of working that out. I send an email out to somebody for my purchases. And it's not that they're necessarily wrong. It's just they're already constraining themselves to say, well, what happened yesterday is going to happen tomorrow. And that's, to me, a problem. What we want them to do is actually focus on, if we want to improve this business, if we want to see greater growth, what are the things we need to do? And for me, understanding you and visualizing your business is really important. So inventory is the same. I run into people who have not invested in an inventory or management system or a warehouse system in any way, and they've got manual updates. So somebody grabs some product, they take it out, it's manually updated on a spreadsheet somewhere, or worse, somebody says, I know what I've got, right? And some of you on this call might be going, okay, but who does that? But that is actually what we do see in the world, that people on their different steps and different journeys actually do that. So for me, that's an absolute myth. The system is never right. And if you want a good example of that, look at organisations that have excelled in automation and adding value to their organisation. they're the first people saying, what's the next logical thing to do? They're never sitting there and saying, I'm done and dusted. Okay, so for now, that's all right. If I now touch on maybe how to go around that process, I'm going to start with a basic framework just to allow us to think about this. And this is not meant to be the framework that you absolutely put in place, but it's to give some guidance today around some rigor and how do you know you're doing the right things. So in the real world, for me, what I call the real world, it's really about making the right decisions in this space. So one of the things you need to do is identify and prioritize the repetitive tasks that can actually be handled in some sort of automated way. So for me, it's about sitting down and saying, okay, well, here's a process. These are the things that we can manage. How much decision making has to be involved in this process? So if we're talking about, say, configurator handling sales, sometimes it's as simple as I just need to know the color and I need to know the size of the product, and that's a configurator. That stuff can probably be automated fairly simply. But what if we're talking about there's 30 decisions, so putting in a kitchen, if you like, into a new house, and there's probably 40 decisions about what you need to do in the configurator there. So that might need more intervention where somebody's saying, hey, but if you do this, that's your triangle pattern to get from the kitchen, from the stove to the fridge, etc. This is going to be impacted. They're sorts of things that may be systems, although AOA is starting to do some of this, and it's good. So the first instance is working out the right things to actually look at and work with. Then it's about drilling into each of those tasks or processes and doing an effective walkthrough and stepping through what needs to be done to really make sure that there is a basic understanding of the conditions that govern that task being completed successfully. So what you often find there is actually a lot of things are repetitive. And actually, it doesn't take a lot of thought process to actually work out that. So if you think about things like replenishment, which we're going to touch on for a warehouse, it's some pretty simple stuff. At the end of the day, I've got below a safety stock level, or I've used this item in the replenishment bay and I need to now bring another pallet through. Humans don't actually have to be involved in that as long as we know there's some trigger that says, hey, we're out of this level, we're out of the stock we need to do. And that can go further as well as leaving the system to say, I've told it the right economic quantities to buy in. So don't buy in 1 carton, but buy in 30 cartons because I'll get a better price. Make sure it fits in a container, if you like. All of that can actually be automated with some guidance around the decision makers. And then finally, we need to put a case around all this stuff, because I'm not an advocate for automate for automation's sake. I'm an advocate for we actually think about the business drivers behind why we're doing this, and that it actually does make sense to do this. So that can be a dollar effectively, it can be a reduction in efficiency, it could be we pin some value on the customer. I'm okay if it's not all dollar driven, right? But for me, it's important to have a case for the change. Don't do things just because somebody thinks it's not an ideal way. There's got to be a reason why it's adding to your strategy and where you're going as a business. So obviously e-commerce is a pretty simple one. If that's your strategy, you must have things in place to make sure your stock levels and your pricing levels are up to date and accurate at all times, because we're not 10, 15 years ago where you could ring up and say, hey, I've got a problem with the stock order you put in Monday, we're going to deliver that a week later. Customers, whether it be businesses or consumers, just don't accept that anymore. So you have to match it to the strategy of the business. So let me just walk through a couple of examples now around this that might help talk through. So I've touched on earlier the purchase to pay process in a certain way. So let me just pick this up. So this is you'll all have different variations of what you do and so on, but this is a reasonably accurate standard view of what's going on. So you can see in this process, we start with somebody creating a purchase order. Some people don't have purchase orders, I understand that, but let's assume for this model we do. It goes through some sort of approval process, heads out to the supplier. Sometimes that's a manual thing. I don't think anybody faxes so much anymore, but it could be a manual email. And then those goods come in. Now, some companies don't even receive the goods. They just pay on the supplier invoice and the stock just goes into some miscellaneous stock area. But certainly from my point of view, a good process would receipt those goods. Meanwhile, the supplier invoices comes through a little later and is manually entered into the system. And somewhere there's a three-way matching or four-way matching, depending on what you're doing, to say, yep, the goods that I purchased or requested have arrived, and yes, we can do that. And then again, that goes through a process that says we're happy now, but that supplier invoice should go through an approval process. Not we're going to pay it, but through an approval process. And it goes through a process, and you might have one or two layers. I dealt with a trucking company a little while ago who said, want everything to go to the MD. And about 2 weeks later, that stopped, and the MD said, there's too many things. Can we do something better? Which is what I'm about to show you. And then it goes based on the approval out for the supplier run. So what I see from a automation perspective, this is a fairly standard, normal one, is we automate that whole process. If you've already worked out through a purchase order what you're actually going to want to come back in, and the goods get receipted and they match everything you asked for, the same line items, the same quantity numbers, the same price that was agreed under a contract or the single purchase, whatever it was. And if you're doing four-way matching, you've done an inspection and said, yes, that's within the specs that I expected, and so on. There's no need for you to go through any other process here. It's ready to be paid. So what we automate and look to automate in enterprise solutions is that whole process, once the goods have been received, can be done the next day. Now, there is a difference here around having an approvals process and having it ready to be paid and physically paid them. So we can take automation steps and make them a suggestion. So imagine a list of, yep, these are all within spec, they're all done. You haven't spent hours getting to that point. And now you can have somebody say, okay, but I'm going to work out which ones I want to pay in order. Some organisations, I'm not suggesting you should, do like to sort of look at maybe their A suppliers and their B suppliers and pay in different rates. I would hope you pay in your terms, by the way, but that's a business decision. There's always an exception rating process. No matter what you put in place, they're not foolproof. There's something that needs to be looked at, and we can also build that up as well. So in some some solutions we work with, there is the ability to say, hey, hold on a sec, this is a bank account that's different to the one in our system. Do we want to do that? Or this is a pattern where they're asking for $32,000 and it seems to look right, but actually they've never asked for that before. Now, automated process on purchase will probably have less of that risk, but we certainly can look at those sorts of exceptions. And then one step further, we can actually fully automate the replenishment. So if you're a warehouse distribution organisation, one of the things that may make sense is you don't need to be involved. If you can recognise the stock levels have dropped to a certain point, and there's all different ways of doing that, the system can trigger to go and purchase those goods for you. So it creates its own purchase order, its own requirements, and punches that out to a supplier. Again, you can have safety measures if you feel like it, where it suggests to you, these are the purchase orders I want to approve, and somebody can go through that process at the end and say, yeah, we do that. So maybe there's something about, I know we're below on that unit, but actually I know there's 2 weeks we're not going to sell that because that customer's gone away or something like that. So we can build in those intervention steps that make sense or opportunities to intervene. But certainly I'm seeing a lot more of this. This is where companies are heading to pretty fast, making sure that those things that don't add value to what they do with customers are actually stripped out and automated as much as possible.
All right, so there we have it. So how do we get started? If you can help us, Rob.
Yeah, so here's Rob's view of the world, and I'm happy to have deeper conversations about these. So from my experience, one of the things, and I haven't got on this list to watch out for, is the person that just rocks into your organisation and says, I do this all over the place, I'm an expert at this, I want to actually take you from A to Z overnight. Don't do it. It's actually, you might be ready for it, but are your people ready for it? Are you actually focused on the right things? So it is definitely a case of learning from others that have gone before you, and I'd like to think I'm part of that conversation to be able to share where people have found some easy wins or what are the sorts of things you want to be concerned about, watching out for. So that's important. I think there's an absolute passion I have about getting the foundation right. So I do see organisations run 7, 8 systems. They talk to each other through maybe even APIs, etc. And then they expect that they're going to get all the integration and all the valuable automation out there. And there are some third-party automation solutions that do make some sense, don't get me wrong, but largely for most businesses that I deal with in mid-space, they get a massive jump from moving in from a business management solution into a true ERP solution where we focus our conversations. And that's because a lot of it's in the box ready to go. It's pre-automated for you, and then it allows you to automate those things. So the example I just had on purchase orders for replenishment being automated through to a supplier payment, you need to have everything actually in an ERP to do that properly, or you have to spend a lot of effort on middleware and other things making multiple systems talk, and you start losing some of the value you're achieving. So for me, having the right foundation to start with is really imperative. Identify and rank the things that you want to do and things that work best for you. So, one of the things for me is if you don't have an e-commerce strategy and it's not a big part of what you do, maybe you sell bulldozers into the mining industry, you have a few parts that go up on the e-commerce. That's probably not where you want to focus your immediate efforts. You probably want to look at other things around service activities on site, how you automate some of those things. Routine things can be automated there. I think it's important as well to step rather than run. So what I mean by that is, again, my theory is around ratchets. You get a foundation, you choose the next thing to do, ratchet forward. You get another step and you take another step. Again, don't run. Don't jump at this and go, I know I want to be at Z. I want to get it all done overnight. Do it in a considered way. So, it is a project or a set of projects that you need to deploy. You do need to invest in it, but you need to be clear about each step. Are you getting the business case delivered that you set out to do, and so on? I just can't underpin this one enough as a comment, because I think this is more than just automation. This is about successful businesses, but you need to get your house in order first. So, I met with somebody just recently again who was talking about how excited they actually would be about turning on MRP for manufacturing for them. And then I walked around their warehouse and looked at, it was just a mess. Stock was sitting on broken cartons. They had no way of knowing what's in there. When I asked them how did they actually record the stock values, it's a stock take we do every month. And it's like, you can't introduce MRP or concepts like that if you actually don't have your house in order. So that's the same if we're talking about moving through any automation. You can't automate bad. It just doesn't work. So you need to make sure you've got it in a position to then automate the concept. As I've said a few times, be outcomes focused. Everything should have a reason for you doing it. It shouldn't just be being done. There should be an outcome that you're trying to achieve. And I don't care whether that's dollars in a simple term, or whether that's just that if you get there, these things are going to happen and your business is better. It just needs to be measurable. When you get to the other side, have we achieved what we will? Some of them are straightforward. We're talking about supplier automation. Well, that's easy. You've got a number of things. But again, if I come back to the fitting your business, if you're sitting there with 100 supplier invoices a month, I'm not sure it's going to make much sense to try and automate all that unless the system just does it natively. It's where you've got a bigger return, because that's probably not taking a lot of time. And lastly, but really importantly, we think of automation about, in some ways, replacing people, but actually we need to take people with us. If we're going into an organisation and saying we're going to maybe take people out of the warehouse and there's 8 people comes 3 people, those 5 people need to understand what's going on, because generally they're probably going into some other role, which is what we see. But more importantly, let's say they're not. Let's say there is a reality of some people are moving on to other sites in an organisation. Those 3 people left. They've got to carry the can for this. So they need to be part of the journey and part of the vision as such. If they're not, they could be your worst enemies, because you still need humans somewhere in the process, and automating it without humans is going to be a problem. So I think change management is always important to a level. I'm not saying it's a democracy and everybody votes on what they should do, but I think you need to spend time and make sure when you get there, particularly in automated processes, the inwards parts of the process and the outwards part of the process, that those people are also part of the process. So just lastly, just to wrap this up as a concept, I'll put this slide in because it's interesting and talks about AI and some of the things coming forward. So there's no doubt that whether you're automating a lot now or whatever, it's part of the future. McKinsey have done some estimates, said up to 800 million. I changed it slightly. I think it said 10 to 800 million. So they had a very broad go there. But we all understand there are some significant changes coming at us now around the introduction of whether it be AI or other automation techniques, and businesses will act differently. So I think this is really important, the last line there, that picking up and adopting automation is really the next big leap of productivity for businesses. And if you're not doing that or not doing enough of that in the right places, others are. So for me, I'd like this takeaway, if there's nothing else, is to have a conversation and talk about, are you going to be better off from introducing automated processes or automation in any way? I will give you the guarantee right now, yes, we need to understand the right path, the right pace, and so on. But there's no doubt this is what automated businesses will be. And if you think about e-commerce areas where we have robots or bots actually being able to take a conversation with a consumer today, consumer asks some frequently asked questions, and the bot can come back and say at 1:59 in the morning, this is what is the answer to your question, or actually, that's a great question. I'll push that through to Henry, who will contact you tomorrow morning, right? That's becoming a standard and a normal, right? We might not think that that's a big issue if we're dealing B2B even, but actually those people in B2B are watching, streaming something to the middle of the night as well, and they reach for their iPads and they place those orders. So I just can't highlight enough for me that automation is here, has been here for a long time. This is not new necessarily, but there's new elements coming through, and you need it to actually take those leaps of productivity.
All right. So thank you, Rob, for running the discussion. So I have a question. Rob, how do I get the data from robots to go into IT systems so that I can use it?
Okay, so there's a few answers to that. So if I just take a system that has some robotic activity in the warehouse, for example, and assuming it's a third party, there's a lot of mechanisms that can actually do that today. So we could be looking at APIs that are connecting the robot and our business system, our ERP as such. We could be looking at using iPaaS solutions, which are a bit more middleware, for want of a word, which allow you to sort of have a middle point where you can do certain things and transform data as needed. But actually, what I'd be looking to do is, in that example of a warehouse, is can the system do it itself? So when we're talking about good ERP solutions, certainly there's an opportunity to not have any robots out there doing things. We have people scanning a pick when they're looking for goods, so they might scan the bay barcode. They can scan the barcode on the product they're picking, or even the sheet if it doesn't have direct barcode on it, and that is then driving into the system directly real time to say, I've just taken one of these, now I've taken two of these, and by the way, you need to do something, replenish or be aware or whatever. So I think there's certainly some technical stuff that can link disparate systems, but I would be looking for mid-sized businesses to say, well, how do I make the best of this just being in my enterprise solution as such?
Thanks, Rob. So talking about warehouse, I have here a question. If my warehouse is a mess, but I need the extra lifting power of automation to clean up this mess, what am I supposed to do? It feels a bit chicken and egg.
Yeah, okay, that's a good question. Look, you have to clean up the mess. There's no way of getting around that. So it depends what you mean in this question by mess. If we're talking physically, there's stock all over the place, it's out of control. Yep, you have to come in on a weekend at some point, do a full stock take, get a basis of truth, and then instill in your people the basic hygiene that actually exists in a warehouse, because we shouldn't assume everybody in a warehouse actually understands that, right? But if you're saying it's your systems that are not keeping up, then you may have a disconnected world where actually you have stuff that says, oh, I sell things and I pick stock, or I put away stock, or I replenish stock into a different level, and so on. Then you need to look at that, how well that system is actually working for you, and see if you can find some ways to solve that. So for me, half the time systems just struggle to actually, the older ERPs and business systems that are connected to best of breeds can struggle with that. But the other half of the time, it's actually using what you've got. It's actually getting back and investing effort, retraining some staff on, when you take that order over there, you must actually take it out of stock, or you must do a barcode. The example I said earlier, Marie, where I was dealing with an organisation, just physically didn't have anybody receiving the good when they arrived. So somebody looked at it and said, yeah, there it is, and put it somewhere. But they didn't have a formal receipt process. So imagine trying to run a warehouse if you can't recognise stock actually coming in. And, the businesses we talk to have multiple times the stock comes in, obviously. So what they were doing in their case, by the way, was once the supplier invoices arrived, which might be with the goods, they might be after the goods, that was then their bulk receipt as such. No chance of being on top of the inventory there.
I totally agree. So earlier, Rob, I think you have touched about, people they're hesitant being replaced by, machines. So I have here a question connecting to that as well. So how do I motivate my admin staff to get excited about the process automation because they think they're going to be doing themselves out of a job?
Yeah. So a couple of things in that. Look, first of all, if we are talking about somebody is going to need to be reskilled and retooled, or is going to be redundant, we need to be open and honest about it to a certain point. But the way to do it overall is to paint the picture, set the scene that they're also passionate about where you're going. So if you look at a debtors person I was talking about earlier, and we're taking away half of their job, maybe to actually do chasing invoices, because we put a dashboard up that's going to make it easier. We've got some, we can have automated follow-ups with customers before that person gets involved. You want to sit that person down and say, but this is what I want you to do for us as a company. This is how I see you taking us forward. That's a great example, because you're never going to not need somebody to ring certain customers and say you've got a problem. Even if you've automated out all the dunning letters or whatever it may be in there, you're going to have recalcitrant people, or just businesses that are just used to extending it and waiting for you to claim hard enough and then drive it. So I think it's about painting the picture, setting what does it look like, and then putting it in place in the business strategy. We are doing this because we expect to see this return for the business, and our customers will be happier. And funny thing in life with collections and automating collections, customers actually do end up preferring to receive those reminder letters, because sometimes it is just simply they've forgotten, right? They don't always like a reminder phone call because they're embarrassed about they haven't paid it or whatever else. Now, I'm excluding those customers who just don't want to pay on time anyway, and there's some of them out there as such. But I think it's making them part of the journey and explaining the whys and the outcome for them.
Thanks, Rob. So there's another question about the benefits. It says the benefit of logistics and supply chain organization is very clear. Do you have an example of how automation improved the pre-site and the on-site processes in the residential housing construction industry? So this is kind of more industry specific, Rob.
Okay, so I may want to take this conversation up directly with the person. So just repeat that one more time for me. So it's in a residential construction.
It's actually, do you have an example of how automation improved the pre-site and the on-site processes in a residential housing construction industry?
Yeah, so there's a bit of additional stuff in this, and I'm actually talking to somebody in this space at the moment. So if we're talking about construction, so obviously we've got site diaries or whatever field. So having some connection between the activity on the site, so that's something that can be automated in there. So what we're looking for, if we think about supplying goods there, and this is construction is notorious for paying on supplier invoices and not purchasing, which I think some of the better ones do purchasing through purchase orders. You can have that automated, as we've talked to today. The other side is they're probably talking about drop ship for a lot of materials rather than having it come back to a single location. So having receipting on site and having that automated through the process, whether somebody takes a photo on their phone to just confirm the spec and the quality and receives it in there, that again can be automated. If we're talking about prior to kicking off the actual build process in this construction conversation, there are a number of steps involved there that can be automated and are automated today. So whether we think about quoting, variations of quotes, having that automated through the process and capturing stages in a CRM or a solution, again, that can be automated to a certain extent, right? And what often you find in the construction business is that there's a lot of work up front to actually do the pre-work, for want of a word, and set the rules. But we can also have things like bank guarantees and so on. So the automation part of that is if you've got bank guarantees in play, and I know it's a little bit old-fashioned for some, then we can have that sitting in clear reports and tell people when there's dates and alerts that, hey, that one can be released or whatever it is. So there's another thing. But I think whoever asks that question, I'd be more than happy to have a deeper contextual conversation around that.
All right, thanks, Rob. And I hope if you have other questions or concern to our audience, please, it's now the right time to ask questions. So I do, again, encourage everyone to please send us your question. So moving forward, we do have a few more questions here, Rob. So it's about the accounts payable. So how do you actually automate accounts payable?
There's a number of parts to that conversation. The first one is if we're thinking about supplier requirements, so we've got a purchase order, we would automate that process as much as possible, including approval maps. So if there's budgets involved in things, you could even have alerts to say, yes, we've approved the purchase, but this has now taken us over the budget. The bigger part that people are seeing is you tend to find supplier automation is driven by having an OCR situation where an email is sent in by a supplier directly to an agreed email address. The system will scrape that and pre-fill information in the system. So because we have the purchase order in there, we're actually matching it to the purchase order. So we're also able to pick up a lot of that information directly from the purchase order. And so the automation is about pre-filling information, and then it's about receipting against that to say, yep, I received the right goods. So in that example I had earlier, we can actually automate the whole process from receiving the goods to straight to, yes, it's okay to pay these people. And if it was the organisation, if your organisation did require it, we could even automate the actual payment. Send off the payment straight away as well, if that made sense. So a fair bit of work there. I think the value in that conversation is understanding what your business is. If you are, often construction businesses can be this way, driven by the supplier invoice being received to know you have to do things, and you don't necessarily have a purchase order, somebody's out at site and has rung up for some timber or whatever else, then we can do that part of the conversation. But in an ideal world, we'd like to see the whole thing connected from the purchase requisition. And even there, I haven't touched on that, we can have purchase requisitions from multiple people at a factory level that rolls up into a purchase order request. So, I need 5, I need 3, and I need 2, and that rolls up to 10. Somebody goes, yep, let's go get 10 as such. So it takes that delay out of the process.
That's true. So we understand that, of course, automation really do have to be dependent on the company's specific requirement and goal. So we have here, I think, our last question, but let's see if there are still questions coming from our audience. So I've been trying to automate stock replenishment. Have you got any tips for me?
Apart from get your warehouse clean and having it ready to go, that's what enterprise solutions should do. So a good ERP will actually enable you to do that. So what it does is allows you to have confidence, first of all, in you understand in real time what stock you have. So one of the tricks that happens with organisations that have done this in the past, and plenty have, is they move away from a stock take concept to a stock check concept. So they go out and pharmaceutical companies are good at this. They can't count the bays that say they're 0, because hey, there's no easier way than physically checking a bay that's got 0 and saying there's 2 cartons there. So there's a number of things manually you might do around the automation, but largely when you've got your inventory in good bearing and you know what's there and you're confident that the tasks that actually update inventory, so we sell things, we put things in after receipt, etc., are updating correctly, you can automate the whole thing. So replenishment then, and there's different layers here for replenishment. It may be the warehouse replenishes from above, so you actually got the stock, and you're driving replenishment tasks to have the picking bay updated, or you're actually replenishing from an external party where you're purchasing stuff. So what we tend to see as a rule, if you've got everything in hand, and it's very achievable, by the way, don't be put off by fixing that side of it, you will end up be able to say, when I get below this factor of say 10 cartons, go and order me another 30 cartons to get me to the right answer. The system will go, hold on a sec, it's economically better to buy 60 cartons, and we've set that as a rule. So you go and buy 60 cartons and kick that process off. And for a lot of organisations that do this well, that need for replenishment through to, as I had in my diagram, through to the paying the bills can be totally automated. The only thing you need to do is have somebody cite the goods as a receipt to say, yep, that's what I wanted. That's exactly the lines, the quantity, the price that we were committed to. But again, whoever asked that question, I'm happy to have conversations in a bit more detail about your specific needs.
Thanks, Rob, for really sharing your expertise and insights. Again, thank you for sending your questions. So I believe that's it for our Q&A. So for those questions that we didn't cover, don't worry. We'll send it to Rob so that he can get back to you in some of the content pieces or through an email. So finally, to our audience, thank you again for your support and for attending the webinar. So we hope that you have enjoyed your experience and learned some valuable insights that you can implement in your business. Maybe, Rob, you have some other last message or announcement that you'd like to share with our audience?
No, I just want to underline the conversation. I'm very passionate about businesses being better, and I always talk about the future fit businesses. There's just so much evidence now that businesses that do the things we're talking about today, and there's a lot of upside of more complex things that we can be talking about, they do thrive. So the whole concept here was survive or thrive in this presentation. I just actually don't think it's enough to survive. And I think, if you're in a difficult area, that's fine for a while, but putting automation into play for your business, whatever that automation looks like, is really what you need to be doing, or at least thinking about doing today, because the people you're competing with are. And there's about to be a strong burst in the next couple of years around things, but you have to have the things foundationally in place to do that. So AI is not going to come in tomorrow and be everything to a business, but I can guarantee you that some of the partners that I work with are looking pretty hard at that around enterprise resource planning solutions and so on, what that means. So take nothing else from this, have a chat with me. Let's talk about some basic things that you can be thinking about, because I passionately think you need to be doing this stuff if you're not.
Again, thank you, Rob, for running the discussion. So I trust that our audience can walk away with insight that you have shared with them. So once again, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and please enjoy the rest of the day. Bye for now.